Rings of Power. Have either of you watched Rings of the new season?
I've tried watching a little bit of episode 1. I had a very hard time getting into the first season.
Have either of you read The Lord of the Rings or The Silmarillion or any of the expanded?
Read The Lord of the Rings, not the same.
Mark?
Nope.
Okay. I can't believe you're in a fantasy and you haven't, but that's a topic for different choice.
It's a case where I watched the movies prior to knowing much of anything about the books, and now that I've watched the movies, I find I can't go to the books. I can't. It ruins it to me, I guess.
There are entire sequences in the books that they don't even cover in the.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
I doubt there's a lot of that, but I'm of a mind that once I watch a movie based on a book, I can't read the book.
That's fair.
I don't know why. It's just me.
Well, they haven't made a movie about the Silmarillion yet, so you've got.
Yeah, and I didn't read the book because it was difficult to get through.
So, if I'm correct, and at least what a lot of the fan theories are, the Silmarillion, which is the first age and like the creation of Middle Earth, is written as if Bilbo Baggins goes to Rivendell in the Fellowship of the Ring when he goes there. Fellowship of the Ring is kind of fucked up because it looks like it all happens in a span very, very quickly. Between when Gandalf leaves the Shire to go read about the ring or to find it out,
60 years,
it's like 50. I think it's 50 years. So Frodo goes from being, I can't remember the age, 20, 30 something to 80 something. Like he's or 40. I can't remember. Anyway, so in that time, all that time, Bilbo's in Rivendell. What the hell's he doing? So the Silmarillion, according to what I've read, is Bilbo researching the elven creation story and putting it into a book, like collecting all their stories and making. So that's what the Silmarillion is. And so a lot of the stuff, the Rings of Power, or they take it from what they call the appendices of the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the extended tales, which are sort of all these little notes that Tolkien made about certain other things. Because Tolkien doesn't write a lot about the Second Age, which is when the Rings of Power takes place. Anyway, they've taken so many 2024 social liberties with this story that even I would consider myself a diehard fan. I have like 27 different copies of The Hobbit. I have all these different editions. I have all the stuff, blah, blah, blah. I have a hard time getting through it because I look at it and I get angry. I've never been angry at a show before, well, other than maybe The Acolyte. But I've never, which we've already covered.
You and like half the rest of the population.
Because I'm big into ancestry and history, as you guys know. I look at it as, and I'll get in trouble for this, the stories are based on Northern European mythology. They're based on Northern European folklore. Dwarves, elves, halflings to a point, gnomes, all that magic stuff that's all invented by Germanic people in Northern Europe. Those things don't exist in China, India, Africa, Polynesia, anywhere. Those are creations of our ancestors. So when I see on screen it co-opted with this myriad of diverse actors, it makes me, I have nothing against the actors. I wish them all the prosperity in the world. It drives me nuts that they couldn't keep that authentic.
You know what it feels a little bit like? And I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. It's a form of cultural appropriation.
That's exactly it is, and I've said that on many Tolkien forums and been flamed by it. It's about 50-50. A lot of people support it, and I'm not being racist.
The people that would typically throw that term around are the same people that are going to argue that because they're going to look at it from a different perspective, which is, the typical Caucasian imposing themselves over other cultures, right? But that's what it is.
And my argument is that it's a story, and I'll back this up in a moment. It's a story by Caucasians for Caucasians, and that's how Tolkien wrote it, because it was written at a time in England where he was writing like Edoras and Rohan is based on Anglo-Saxon time from about say 500 to somewhere around 1000 AD. The wooden castles, like the wooden big houses. That's what that's from. Gandalf, the name is one of the houses in Valhalla from the Norse mythology. That's where that comes from. Gandalf is based on the wanderings of Odin from the Proada and the Icelandic sagas, when he would walk around in a pointed hat and a long cloak, and he was basically a shit disturber, which is exactly what the races of Middle Earth thought of Gandalf, of this sort of troublemaker who goes around and, like, in the movies where Grima Wormtongue tells Theoden, when he's under the spell of Saruman, that, you know, why should we welcome you? Because you're a bringer of ill news. Because that's sort of what Odin was. He would go around and so that's where Gandalf comes from. The dwarves are from Norse mythology. That's what they were. Miners in mountains, which is why, and the Norse believed that you don't go into caves because that's where the dwarves were. Elves were the same things. Elves lived on this Elfheim, which was like this golden, shining realm of light. That's what Valinor was. That's where all these Tolkien things come in. Anyway, I can't imagine people be celebrating it if it was a writer from, Tanzania or Zaire in Africa writing about African pygmy legends and folklore about southern Africa, lions, elephants, things like that, and then somebody coming along and saying, you know what we need in this story?
White guy.
Indian, Chinese, Maori, and white actors. We need these actors in to make this story better. I can't imagine a lot of these really far left culture warriors saying, "Oh, that's a great idea. That's perfect." It'll never fucking happen. And the last thing I'll say on that is the movie Mulan, when they did the live action Mulan.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Watch that. Horrible, bad
Cartoon, great message.
But look in that film and tell me how diverse that cast is. And when I argue that, but that's Chinese. Why would you put white people in a Chinese movie? Fucking exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
See,
and people don't get the.
And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I don't want, if they did a show like Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys novel about that sort of voodoo-esque stuff. I don't want, if they do an adaptation on TV, I don't want to see any white people in it,
Yeah,
because there's nothing to
because
do with white people.
the only stories that are being manipulated, changed, um, are those that have originated from European
Yeah.
descent, right? Those are the only ones. All of the others, now, mind you, you're not going to see up here a lot of, folk stories or original works from, say, Africa, likely, in some of the more remote places of the world. It's just not going to likely happen. But you can't tell me that they don't have their own stories.
they could.
Surely
They would be
do.
really
Oh,
interesting stories.
And they probably are really
Well, but
interesting stories. And I would probably spend money to watch them if they were interesting.
But they could have.
Black Panther that movie proved that people want to see African specific cultural stories. I would love to see a Black Panther movie prequel of, without any other superheroes, hundreds of years early, because in the movie, I forget what they say, the meteor crash that brought vibranium. It was a long time ago,
Yes.
right? Or I'd like to see that story with no white actors, no Indian actors, no fucking Maori actors. No offense to any Maori people, but I don't. You don't want to see that in those stories. Same thing with Moana. When the Moana live action movie comes out, if there's a white dude in the movie, it's gonna look fucking
Yes.
stupid.
Yeah.
But they could have done it the same way Game of Thrones did it.
Hmm.
Entirely diverse world, but every culture is from a different continent.
Yeah, and
There's no reason why Rings of Power could not have done something in that vein.
And what pisses me off is, as in Rings of Power, the stranger, Gandalf, whoever it ends up being, I think it's going to be one of the Blue Wizards. They're venturing into ruin. This country in the east that Tolkien doesn't write a lot about is supposed to be like a Middle Eastern Chinese kind of hybrid of, like, just different people from who's in other side. That's your diversity,
Yes,
because it's a different goddamn place. Just like Harad in Lord of the Rings, and where the Mumakil and stuff like that are from, the big elephant people. If they do a whole episode based on that region of Middle Earth, I don't want to see any white people, because there aren't any white people there. And some people say, "Oh, Tolkien was racist. He made the bad guys black. He made the bad guys whatever." Even if that was true, it's because he wrote it in the 1930s, 1940s, when we were at war, and he had his own racial sensibilities, and it's a product of a specific time.
But they've even went to the
I think that's
They didn't
reading.
change the orcs.
Yes.
There were no female orcs. They did not have children. They were bred like the Urukai, similar to the Urukai.
They're more like they were grown than they were
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
They're spawned from dark magic from the earth.
And
Yeah.
they were
And
bred for war. That's all they
yeah.
did.
And D&D 5, D&D the new ones, it's exactly the same thing. Here, I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to, because
Uh-oh.
this pissed
In
me
this
off.
Rings of Power, there is an orc asking, I don't remember the guy's name, the leader's name, not to go to war because he has a family, which was the wife and the baby, and they didn't exist. They didn't breed like other races did.
Okay, so I'm going to read you two completely different. This is from D&D. So this is just a very quick synopsis of what Orc was from the original 2014 handbook for 5th edition.
Fifth edition has been out that long.
Oh yeah. Savage and fearless, orc tribes are ever in search of elves, dwarves, and humans to destroy, motivated by their hatred for the civilized races of the world and their need to satisfy the demands of their deities. The orcs know that if they fight well and bring glory to their tribe, Grumish will call them home to the plain of Acheron. Is there in the afterlife where the chosen ones will join Grumish and his armies in the endless extraplanar battle for supremacy. That's the original orc from D&D that we've all known and loved and has been successful for 5 decades. This is what they've changed orcs to. And this made me fucking seething angry. Where is it here? Orcs trace their creation to Grumish, a powerful god who roamed the wide open spaces of the material plane. Grumish equipped his children with gifts to help them wander the great plains and vast caverns and churning seas and face the monsters that lurk there. Even when they turned their devotion to other gods, orcs retained Grumish's gift: endurance, determination, and the ability to see in darkness. Orcs are, on average, tall and broad, blah, 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 blah. Orc youths on some worlds are told about their ancestors' great travels and travails. Inspired by those tales, many of these orcs wonder when Grumish will call on them to match the heroic deeds of old, and if they will prove worthy of his favor. Other orcs are happy to leave old tales in the past and find their own way. And the picture they've given is of this
Couldn't be
orc with
further from.
with what I would consider as some sort of like, she looks like a lesbian weightlifter. That's the best answer I can give. And she's got this axe, and there's an orc child running, and then there's an orc in the background on a white horse with a bird pointing as if they're all going out to the zoo. So that's the picture they give of orcs. Now that's the picture of orcs that they had previously. An orc who is out there who would eat dwarves and eat elves and eat humans because they're chaotic evil race, because they worship a chaotic evil god.
We're very much in the time of there is no evil. Everybody is just slightly misunderstood.
And that's my problem with
this is the part of the society nowadays that I despise, because there is too many people out there, and I see it sometimes in my own kids, where they are associating a fantasy character to real life, and they're bridging that gap somehow, and then they're now finding associations between real people and a fantasy, and then they don't like the fact that the fantasy creature is portrayed as being this or that, evil or bad, because they see some kind of
that's
connection
with entertainment for the last decade,
which is absolutely ridiculous. It's fantasy, it's made up, it's pretend. It's supposed to be a tool to spark imagination, right? Which is what we grew up on. That was the whole point of it all, was to be imaginative, to disappear for a day or whatever, and just pretend on having adventures.
Well, even in the so in the new edition, there are no dwarven subraces. So as a lover of dwarves, I loved mountain dwarves and hill dwarves, blah blah. There are 3 elven races. There's drow, high elves, and wild elves. They don't even mention the fact that the drow are inherently evil and worship a god bent on the destruction of the surface world. They've completely glossed over that fact as if they're just slightly purple.
So you saying that like Loth doesn't exist?
Well, they exist, but they've altered the they've altered the description just to make it sound like they're just slightly different than us, but they're the same. So, like for example, racial abilities are now gone. They've changed the name race to species,
Yes.
and so
That's
theoretic. So,
because it's a trigger word.
but so instead of an orc being strong and getting pluses to strength or constitution to, because that's what they always did, now that's all gone. So if you're a gnome and you pick I forget which one it is. I think it's like the wayfarer or guide. If you're a gnome and you pick the guide, and you're an orc and you pick the guide, you have the same racial bonuses. So a gnome who's 2 to 3 feet tall can have the exact same starting stats as an orc who is close to 7 feet tall. So is this orc paper thin?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And it's all this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff to make everybody equal from the start. Everybody gets the same bonus. Everybody
No.
gets the same bonus features, and it doesn't make any sense.
Everybody's special, no one's special.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's to me it takes away, and I've had arguments with this on Reddit because I love stirring shit up, but it takes away the role playing aspect because in our time, if you wanted to play a bugbear in a campaign full of elves and dwarves, you had to come up with a very good reason as to why your party is going to trust you as an individual because you're of a race that has fought with elves and dwarves since time immemorial. Why are you with the party?
Well,
That was part of the juggling. Now
role
it's
playing in the golden age of tabletop RPGs and role playing now are two different things. And
yeah,
I would argue that the latter isn't, and just that it just isn't. Um,
yeah.
I had a conversation about this with one of the individuals that was at Mind Games again, probably a couple months ago. I had wandered in just to look around, um, and the guy that was there seemed like he was bored and wanted to talk, and saw that I was looking at the D&D books and started just conversing. And at one point, I told him that I wasn't a fan of fifth edition. He was all for fifth edition, and so he asked why. And I said because there's no cons to all of the positives, you know. And he says, "What do you mean?" Well, nobody gets a detriment for choosing a particular uh, race or class. You get to arbitrarily assign the bonuses that you want based on whatever, and it's only bonuses. There's no detriments, and there's nothing I'm more suspicious about uh, in general than when somebody is only looking at the pros and never the cons. There's always one or
Well,
the other,
I
right?
will say that when fifth edition started, they had the only negative that I can find was sunlight sensitivity for drow, kobolds, goblins, those kind of creatures, where they had, I think it was either a minus to hit or a minus. It was a minus to something to reflect the fact that they're mostly underground
See, the
creatures.
easier way to deal with that scenario, which I do agree with, if you've got a race of creatures that predominantly live in the dark, their eyesight would be great in the dark, but you bring them out in the light, what they should be doing is not so much having a difficulty to hit a target or whatever, but reduce their reduce their sight range, right? It'd be no different than us if we go into you're outside in the bright sun for half a day, and all of a sudden you come into a dark room, you can't see anything,
Yeah,
right? It's
so
the same thing,
And now
except
I
it would
think
be more
it's
persistent for.
disadvantage.
yeah, so in the 2014 or Volo's Guide to Monsters, I forget what that came out, but it came out at least 5 or 10 years ago. They had sunlight sensitivity for this is just kobolds, but other races had it. You have a disadvantage on attack rolls on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight when you're in a brightly lit area. So when Tasha's Guide to Everything came out and the multiverse and the new monster handbooks came out years later, they got rid of all of that. Just like they're giving almost every creature now dark vision, except or what do they call it? A dark vision. So what we used to call infravision,
Yeah,
they're giving all these races dark vision. Well, okay, but Why? Why do like light elves that
Because then there's
exist?
no challenge anymore.
Light elves that exist in the astral plane where there's no real darkness, they get dark vision. Why? Doesn't make any sense. They're constantly surrounded by light. But it's this constant quest to make everybody equal, which I fucking hate. And this goes back slightly to the political discussion we had earlier, where nobody votes down those initiatives on ballots like minority communities. When they had an affirmative action thing in California a couple of years ago, it was on the ballot whether or not they're going to keep it. Minority communities voted overwhelmingly to get rid of it. So if the people you're marketing, and this is what I've said on Reddit about D&D, a lot of the images on it are very campy, very borderline. I mean, they're making characters look very feminine. Like the male characters look very like the picture for the dwarves. It's just this happy guy turning and smiling. He's got a bandana on backwards. He's got an earring. He looks like a fucking pirate. And he's doing something with tools, which is polar opposite to what dwarves are
Well,
in every.
even look at the advanced D&D handbook there, the fairly famous drawing that you of course got us in those posters, like that image of you've got there's the dwarf, there's a barbarian, I think a wizard, and a rogue or fighter
Yeah,
character in it, who is a
yeah,
female, I think, in
yep.
that picture, I might add, and they're standing around this dragon that they've slayed, and they're all standing there quite proud, and you know you don't see that anymore,
No.
and
It was all unnecessary. You're probably not going to find a more inclusive group than the D&D group.
yeah,
And what my comment was very similar back to what we're talking about other cultures and their histories. Why not just bring in other modules of, like, you've got your dwarves and your elves and stuff, and have that be the core, and then have a module people can buy that are Chinese based, because they used to have what they called Oriental adventures in the original Advanced
I
Dungeons and
remember
Dragons.
those.
I have those books because they're stories where they brought ninjas in and whatnot, and they can't really use the word Orient anymore, which is strange, but they brought that stuff in to make up for that lack of content. They could do the exact same thing.
Yeah, and they were really cool. It added just a slightly different feel or flavor to the game.
And they could do the same instead of remaking the game and making it inclusive to everyone and no one at the same time. They bring in stories of, let's say, I don't know what you'd call it, adventures in Delhi, where it would be Indian-based gods, Indian-based folklore, to give people the option to buy it. And if because D&D is, the numbers are dropping off. That's why they felt they needed to do this, because they wanted to appeal to a broader audience.
yeah, which I think is a mistake myself.
I don't think they're ever. It's much like the Marvel, Disney, and whatnot. That audience does not exist, or they're not interested to begin with.
The thing I have an issue with it, and I get it, we have we have definitely come from a different generation, but when we got started in this, and I was, I'm trying to think, I was in Scouts Canada. I'm trying to think of whether it was Beavers or Scouts. I think it was Scouts, and we were on a bus trip to a camp when one of the older scouts, who was several years older than most of us, he brought a set. He brought a collection of dice. He brought his books. It was like a little pre-made. I couldn't tell you a lot of details because I was, I don't know. I don't think I was even in my teens at the time. And he ran an adventure for us all the very first time. I remember because I was delegated being a wizard. We didn't make characters. Everything was pre-made at the time because it was simpler. Um, and I loved it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was fantastic, and all of us were really invested. We were all enthralled with the whole process. And then later on, we were all in high school, and I found that one handbook. I was like, oh yeah, we got to try this now because
Mm-hmm.
I had forgotten it until that point.
Well,
And then that's how it started, and it
I can
snowballed
tell
from there.
I can tell you that between that and reading The Hobbit and Willow, that changed my life. I mean, growing up in the country where we were, there were several groups. There were the jocks, there were rednecks, and then there were the misfits.
Yeah, the
We,
outsiders that didn't fit into any other group.
and
That was us.
I was surrounded by people in public school and even in grade 9 to a certain extent who were all into skidoos, fishing, hunting, drinking, trucks. I could have easily went that route had it not been for this kind of stuff. So I thank the TSR Gary Gygax gods and the Tolkien gods for not falling into that route.
It was a different game then. It was,
Yeah.
even though it was still fantasy, it was far more serious.
Mhm.
Even for, um, you know, kids in the age of say 12 to 16 and even
Mhm.
older, I suppose it was a more serious um, subject, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was still make believe. It was still using your imagination. The scenarios were still, in our case, it was largely combative. Um, still is, but it wasn't the, I don't know the term I want to use. Now it feels like it's far more aloof. You know, um,
Yes.
it's less serious. It's less the dungeon crawling, more people just acting in a group.
A
I
lot of
think.
a lot of it is also based now from what I've seen and what I've been reading on Reddit. People are really I say people. Some players are really excited about the College of Dance Bard. Oh, now I get to be this guy who dances around. That's great. But if you try and play that on any module made before 2022, you're going to have a hell of a hard time because none of those abilities translate to those modules. Because those modules, like the people who wrote, like Gary Gygax and those guys who started back in the 70s, they were coming from Conan the Barbarian,
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings, which is Lord of the Rings, if you do ever read the books, are a very brutal world, that kind of stuff. And then second edition had to compete with Predator, Alien, those kind of really, even Willow to a certain extent, where this woman wants to kill this baby. I mean, that's you don't see that in movies nowadays, and that was pretty tame for
Yeah,
fantasy.
I would argue that Dungeons and Dragons has become more childlike
Hmm.
in its play style and audience, unfortunately, to what we grew up with. It just feels that way. It's too touchy feely. It's to appease everybody, kind of, so that nobody's upset. Uh,
Hmm.
that's the same reason why characters don't have any cons to their abilities. It's only positives. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but like that the it, it's like the characters that we see in movies that just instantly are perfect at everything. It's the exact same
Yeah,
mentality.
they don't have to do anything. They don't have to do
There's
anything.
no detriment.
No,
There's no
no journey.
risk.
Remember
It's no
the
fear
the
of failure.
flaws table?
Well, I
The
was
what?
just pulling
Sorry.
that.
The flaws table, and
Yeah,
you rolled and you picked the flaw. Your character gambling,
yeah. You had to just roll with it.
Well,
afraid of the dark, whatever they have, and then you could kind of play that up again.
just pulling up like one of my favorite races, and I think I mentioned it in our group chat was I've always wanted to play this one character kit from the Dwarf Handbook from second edition, and I've always wanted to be a deep dwarf to play this. So here are some of the cons for the I'll give you the bonuses and the cons. Special advantages: +1 bonus to Constitution saving throws on top of that for most dwarves. So you get +2 to con right off the bat. Plus you get the negative -1 to charisma that all dwarves had because they're gruff. They
Not
don't really
friendly,
not friendly.
especially to others. Yeah.
So you have a chance off the like on a deep dwarf. If you roll an 18, you have a chance to have a 20 Constitution right off the bat, which gives you 1 point of regeneration. Very, very, very rare to ever have. To offset that potential really high bonus, -1 penalty to all rolls in bright sunlight or within the radius of light spell. Plus, you have a 10% experience negative 10% experience bonus. So every time you get 100 experience points, you get 10 less than everybody else for playing that dwarf. So there so there was a table that worked all this out, which I can't find now. But by the time you got all your, if you were playing a level 20 campaign and you went from 1 to 20, you would be level 15-ish, while all your other players, if they pick normal races, were level 20. So to achieve that great constitution, you had a huge fucking negation against all the other characters. And like you say, that does not exist now,
Oh, and
which
it
I
removes some
hate.
of the fun. I
I
think.
don't believe any of the half races exist either.
No, they got rid of all the half breeds, and which I also hate because it makes it so that you're basically you're just supposed to, you can still play a half elf, but you just pick, and you can be a half elf, half orc. You can be a half elf, half Goliath, which doesn't make any sense, but you can do that, but you have to pick one of the races
One or
and you
the
draw
other.
all your bonuses from that. So on topic, I'm going to bring up the bonuses for one of the most ridiculous races that I've ever found, which are the astral elves.
It's going to be interesting going over the one.
So here are all the bonuses for the astral elves. Astral fire. You know one of the following cantrips of your choice: dancing light, light, or sacred flame. So sacred flame is a damage dealing cantrip right off the bat that gives you, by the time, if you're an 11th level character, let's say you're like the one you want to do where you start at 10th level. Okay, let's say you, by the time we get to 11th level, if I picked an astral elf right out of the gate, I would have a cantrip spell that does 3d8
Well,
damage,
Sacred Flame though is available to others.
not for free.
Yes, it is.
What other races can you
Oh,
get that for
race.
free?
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. No.
classes,
Yeah,
yes.
classes. Yes,
So
race. No.
you have either of those three. You can also, and they also have dark vision. They have the charmed Fey ancestry thing that most elves have. They also have keen senses where you're proficient in perception. You also have starlight step, which is like misty step, and you also have astral trance. Which basically means that if you find some exotic weapon, just take a short rest or long rest, and you can add it as your proficiency as soon as you wake up, because somehow you gain the knowledge on how to use this weapon while you're sleeping. All elves have that. So that entire list of things, not one negation.
So
Yeah.
that's where you're going to have to house rule or table rule a few.
Which
it's
if you have to do that out of the gate, then what's the point of going through all this?
And it's almost impossible to do that with D&D Beyond if your players are remote, because you're using like what I do, where all the stuff is calculated automatically. How do you institute table rules when your player is remote, or even in a
Yes, and
situation?
they're using only what's provided by
Yeah, because there's no. I mean,
wizards.
do you trust your player that they've made that adjustment? Like when we play here, and I gave you guys all the cloaks of displacement, I have to remember all the time to hit disadvantage on all those rolls. How there's no way for the DM, as far as I'm aware, to know if your remote player is giving you the correct information. How, like, you know what I mean? Like how can you judge that? And most times I imagine the DMs just say, well, fuck it, let's go ahead.
I mean, it's always been about storytelling and
Yeah.
crafting an adventure that you play out in your own imagination, which is the wonderful thing about it all. It was about exercising your imagination, which these days I have to say I think there's a sharp decline in general imagination in people. You see it you see it in movies. That's why they're rehashing so much. That
Why would you ever need to remember it?
well, exactly. The phones are bad. They don't
Well,
exactly promote, you know,
like in
There isn't one of
originality
us sitting here that couldn't recite almost the whole second edition.
and that would take some time. But I mean,
After
it would
poring over it,
yeah,
the only
it
thing
wouldn't
I
take
think I
long
need
for it
right?
to come back. I don't
the
think.
only thing I think I need a slight refresher is Thaco.
and we never had to go to a phone. We could all.
Oh yeah. I remember arguments where we'd all have the handbooks out and we were just giving different. It's like Bible scholars. We're giving different like this is how I interpret this sentence in the player's handbook. No, this is how I interpret it.
I don't recall in modern systems of D&D having such vivid discussions about interpreting rules before as we used to. Now, is it because maybe we've become less invested in it? That would be my first thought. is that
I
it's
But-
not.
kind of get what they're trying to do.
I think I do too, but it's not.
What do you think they're trying to do?
Well, because Pathfinder's the exact opposite of what Fifth Edition. Fifth Edition very much streamlined everything.
Mhm.
Pathfinder had so many options, so many rules that can have other rules. You become a min-max,
Mhm.
and they're trying to
It's World of Warcraft.
they're trying to pull
Yeah.
away from that to get back to the story and imagination.
Storytelling, yeah, and I can see that, but it's a little too loose in the sense that I hate the fact that the way saving throws work. I don't like the fact that you have you basically have a saving throw on anything.
In which version?
Well, fifth edition.
Fifth Edition.
I miss where skills and tools made sense. Like you had,
Categories are too broad in fifth edition.
well, for example, you had like move silently, hide in
I don't know
shadows.
what they have for saves in Fifth Edition.
Saves in fifth edition are like you can be proficient in a saving throw, so you're great in it, right? I mean, all the training in the world in a class doesn't affect your overall, or doesn't affect your brain. Like if you're an orc and you have a -2 to intelligence right off the bat, like in second edition, you're gonna be worse than a regular person because that's your racial, it's your genetic makeup. In fifth edition, with everybody the same, none of that matters anymore. Like if you play Lost Mines of Pendelver now, where they've taken all the stuff about orcs being evil out of it, and you're a brand new player, it's going to be really confusing as to why, if you take it verbatim from the book, why is this marauding band of orcs attacking us?
Yeah.
We have 2 of them in our party, and they're very nice. I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense. Why are goblins hurting us? They're supposed to be nice creatures. This doesn't make any sense. Like, what's next? Making dragons all happy too? Like it's stupid. But that's my thought of it, and I hate, again, circling back, I hate the fact that almost every single, they're going after a demographic that has, I mean, D&D's been around for 50 years or more. These groups in China, Africa, India, if they haven't signed on yet, this book isn't going to get them into it. And I mean, fifth edition was at its height during Stranger Things. If they didn't sign, if they, and D&D kind of exploded for that 4 or 5 year period, but if those groups who were watching Stranger Things didn't join then, this book where
But
Edition.
no,
No,
it was in like
no.
what 1984. They're playing
Well-
second edition.
Well, and as I won't take credit for this, but somebody else on Reddit was posting it, that by making the game and the illustrations and the mood around it very feminine, I'll use the phrase gay friendly because everything is bright rainbow colors, everything is whatever, and by having everything look very campy, you're alienating the Middle East because they won't let people play it. You're alienating China because the government won't let people play it because of those particular reasons. So the groups you're pandering to will be negated from playing the game because you're pandering to another group. Whereas 10 years ago, if you were a gay player, you were a gay player. Nobody cared. I mean, if we had a guy in our original campaigns back in high school who decided to play a gay character, I mean, you could do that because there was no rule against it, and there was nothing that said you couldn't, you could play whatever you wanted to play.
Have no need or desire to play contrast.
They would have been playing first edition. 89 was second.
Yeah, and the original Gygax, like I have those original manuals, so if you ever want to take a look at them, it's very rudimentary and it's very, very rough, but again, it was made from the 1970s and 1960s, 1950s stuff like Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, Lovecraft. It's not an easy. Greyhawk, which is what it was based on, was not an easy world to play a game in because everything was out to kill you, just like in every other fucking fantasy setting that we've ever played in history. Like if you pick up the new player's handbook, let's say you're 13, like well my son's 16, who's been playing for 2 or 3 years. I gave him the Drist, the Homeland Legacy compendium to read. If you read both of those books side by side, you will not understand any of the Drist books because all the Drow are evil. They hate the surface elves and they're actively trying to slaughter every surface elf. If you transpose it to this, that's not the case. They're just happy to be around, and they're all happy, and everything's great, and the orcs are friendly, and all these other races are like the Dragonborn are very friendly. I can't stand that because it's also not indicative of the planet.
I would like to see. I think that would be
The new one coming out,
just to see
yeah.
how they describe each creature. But I'm curious as to the wording versus say our second or even I don't know, month.
I don't think the monster manual comes out
No,
until
sorry, it's not out for.
I think it's in
Yeah,
February,
it's not out for quite a while.
which is odd. Like it's
Player's handbook, and then the DM guide like a month later,
I think it's December, yeah.
and then the monster.
They're going to have to make big changes to the monster manual because a lot of the monster manual stuff where you actually get into the individual races, it provides an alignment. The other thing that in fifth edition, which is a footnote, is alignment. I bet you if you brought up your character sheet and if you're a new time player, you wouldn't even see the section where it even talks about alignment. And alignment back in the old days was so important because if you were a paladin, you couldn't be any alignment other than lawful good. Now, it's like blade singers, this trusted elven tradition for millennia that they don't ever show the outside races. Now anybody can be a blade singer. You can be an orc blade singer. You can be a halfling blade singer. They've even changed the rules about heavy weapons.
See,
Now,
that's where it'll be up to DM or the game master to run their particular version of what
rules as written right now in the new player's handbook and a little bit in the other player's handbook, so just to clarify, if you're a halfling and you're 3 feet tall and you meet the strength requirement, if you're out in open world and you kill an ogre who's using a great axe, you can then equip that weapon. Even though it would be 7 feet tall, as long as you meet the strength requirement, you can carry that weapon. Now, as a DM, I would say you can definitely use it once you go to a town and you pay money to have them adjust it to your height. Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
You cannot pick up that weapon and use it in the field, but rules as written, now they can do that. Whereas before, if you're a small creature, you cannot use a heavy weapon, which makes sense.